Hi, folks. My name is Krishna Sankar. We are on the panel Opportunities and Challenges using AI to detect fraud across industry verticals. This should be an interesting panel. It should be an interesting panel for us. First of all, I want to thank the Rework folks and Katie specifically for organizing the panel, as well as finding interesting panelists, as you will see now. Good. That's the right time to talk about our panelists. Let us get introduction from the panelists. We will go in alphabetical order. Mairtin, you first.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mairtin. I'm one of the founders of Ravelin, which is a fraud detection company specializing in enterprise merchants and third-party fraud. My background's in actually crime analysis. I was in Scotland Yard for 10 years, and yeah, crime and criminology. That's me.
Good. Thank you. Excellent. Mousumi. We can't hear you, I think.
You're on mute.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a financial crime risk analytics professional from San Francisco Bay Area with experience in financial crime analytics, money laundering and fraud analytics, advanced data analytics, data quality, integrity, data management, and governance at consulting and financial services companies. I have 12 plus years of risk analytics and 5 plus years of teaching and mentoring experience in data analytics field. I have completed many end-to-end high-impact full life cycle analytic processes by identifying opportunities to implement operational changes in complex organizational and multidisciplinary cross-functional team-oriented settings. I published papers in many peer-reviewed journals, data science magazines, blogs, diversity and inclusions magazines, and spoke at TEDx Big Data and Risk Analytics Conference. I'm passionate about leveraging new AI and ML-based solutions to detect financial crime and to reduce regulatory and financial risk for banks and financial service industries. Thank you.
Thank you. Satheesh.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me in this panel. I manage the seller risk data science team at eBay. Anything to do with risk from a seller side. It's a marketplace where you got a buyer risk or seller risk. I manage the seller risk data science team. Prior to that, I was a consultant for a long time. I had a consulting firm that I've co-founded, which I sold in 2017. Since then, I decided to try out a large company and see how things are on the other side. I do maintain an interest in startups, though.
Thank you. Good. Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't know whether I introduced myself or not. I didn't know whether the live went on. My name is Krishna Sankar. I'm a distinguished engineer, AI at US Bank. I do multiple things, work on fraud systems, explainability, experimentation, and ethics of AI, etc. We wear a lot of hats. This is good. So now let us introduce the topic. The topic, of course, is fraud and AI, right? What does it? How do they come together? What are the interesting things that we can do, etc. So then I have a couple of points to talk about. First of all, fraud itself is very interesting. The main this thing is class imbalance, right? You have the fraud, the small number of fraud transactions causing fraud and the transactions without fraud, right? So which makes it very interesting. That means we do have to do all kind of creative sampling techniques, subset visualization. For example, if you put the whole thing, this will be this tall and the other thing will be very tiny that you won't be even able to see anything, etc. So, and then you have to do slicing of data. So that is one thing. Second, more interesting is fraud is dynamic. Right? Without making any value judgments, we are against human ingenuity. Right? People try multiple things, and Mairtin, of course, you're not only on the fraud, you're in all kind of other things as well. People try multiple things. They try to probe you, see holes in your processes, incongruencies, right? Etc. Right? And so you do have to think about, you should pay attention to things like data drift, the model degradation, model refresh. All of those things are important that you need to think about because of the dynamicity of the nature. The third, of course, is weak signals, right? The signals are weak, so which means you have to have a lot of features, more complex models, and probably more involved architectures, which in turn makes the model more inscrutable, right? If you're using neural networks or transformers for that matter, they become inscrutable, which in turn requires explainability and various other features. So these things build on the top of the other because of the weak signals. And finally, as you know from the panelists themselves, right? It is a broader domain. So the models that work on, for example, AML might not work on e-commerce, and they might be very different in credit card or identity theft or anomaly detection. So this is a varied set of problems, varied set of domains. Complexities are increased. Anyway, so these are all interesting things. Now the question to ask is, what does it mean to use AI in this domain? Luckily, we have the panelists, so we can ask all kinds of questions. So it's good. So let me start from the first question. How does AI improve fraud detection? Right? From a broader perspective, what does it mean applying AI to fraud? We will go by alphabetical order. Mairtin, your turn.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So I think there's two great promises, I think, in the domain that we work in for AI and fraud detection, which is e-commerce to be specific. The first is this promise of accuracy. And it comes not without some cost, but just to talk about it briefly, the benefits of the accuracy comes from basically removing some really obvious sources of bias. When you get rid of hard encoded rules, which are, they're a kind of model, but when you remove opinion from that part of thing, I'm not saying these models are without potential for bias. It's a big question, and there's ways of dealing with that. But the first is that promise of accuracy is a really great thing, and you get things like the interplay of various features, the interplay of results. We had clients, for example, that used to do very, very, I would call them rough kind of ways of fraud detection. So, for example, if they saw things in a geographical area, put a bounding box over that area. So rather than trying to find ways to lift people out of this, they would categorize a whole area as fraudulent. It's a terrible way to do it. So this is where accuracy of fraud detection, of AI and fraud detection, by some measure of accuracy, means that we can start to have a much more nuanced view of things, a much more nuanced view of fraud detection and of lifting people out rather than categorizing people with a broad brush. So I'd say that's the first one. The second one is that it frees up individuals in our domain. It frees up individuals who used to work on rule management and caseload management, which can be quite a dispiriting task. It can free them up to become much more interesting investigators. It can be a much more interesting and thankful career to spend worthwhile human intellect on finding interesting fraud cases that will feed back into a system. So I'd say those are the two great promises of AI and fraud detection from our perspective. You lose agency unless you keep an eye on it, which is the downside. You lose the ability to pull a lever and make something happen really quickly without thinking about it. But of course, that's a huge challenge for us all.
Good. Thank you. Actually, the second point that you mentioned is the intelligent automation, right? Intelligent automation, ability to automate not mundane, but things that we can do easily. Good. Thank you. Mousumi, what are your thoughts?
So I'll talk about it from AML and compliance and sanctions risk analytics perspective. So there are four main things that I can think of. First is efficiency, the reduction in false positives or unproductive alerts we can achieve leveraging AI. Second is effectiveness, increasing the correctly identified suspicious activity or true hit rate is very important in our space. Third is automation, freeing up resources and increasing team productivity. And fourth is advanced analytics and results by demonstrating like accurate risk scoring, improved alert quality, interpretable machine learning, robust decision making, and detecting hidden patterns. So those are the main 4 areas that I can think of that AI has contributed significantly in money laundering, compliance, and sanctions risk space.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Satheesh, what are your thoughts?
I've worked for almost 20 years in fraud detection, from industries, tax fraud to insurance fraud, warranty fraud, click fraud, and now e-commerce fraud. So, if you look back 10 years ago, right, when the claims processing, right, when a claim comes in, is it a fraudulent claim or not, right? So it used to be end of the day batch job, and all the features used to come from the claim file itself, like, what type of claim, where it came from, things like that, right? It's completely radically changed now, right? Because as you go into transactional fraud, where you are talking about, e-commerce, it's transactional, right? Even in the insurance industry, the claims as they come in, you're kind of you're making a judgment of whether it's a fraud or not, right? So what's changed? What AI has really enabled is getting to that transactional level, high velocity, massive amount of information, not just structured data coming out of claims file, for example, right? You're looking at the confluence of structured, unstructured, image, NLP, everything, right? You can so AI enables that, right? So what used to be batch jobs that used to run in the end of the day is now transactional in second with the latest information. Within 5 seconds, what was the review that was posted on that thing? Or is there a buyer and seller colluding, right? The signals are much more real time. So which let me get back 10 years ago, most of the job that ended up in the investigators were based on rules, right? Rules were, you deploy rules and, that was it, right? AI has transformed that, right? So now you can you go much beyond those discrete rules into properties and so that's what AI has enabled, to get to the transaction level, high velocity, high latency, that type of thing, without AI, you can't get that with rules, right? Rules are static. They are useful. I have to say that rules are useful because they can respond to things faster. Like if a breakout of fraud happens in a certain region, I can deploy a rule in the production system, stop that, right? But the ML models, they look for patterns much more broadly, so both are needed. But so both can't live without each other. But hopefully, I conveyed what AI ML enables in this new world.
Yeah. No. You painted a very interesting picture, and also very the right picture, right? You can see the things that are there in the earlier years, and now what is happening. Excellent. That leads to the next question. Do they differ in different verticals? Right? So that's probably they do, but then how do they differ is the question, right? So I think I'm going to go in the reverse order. So Satheesh, back to you again.
Yeah, so it's interesting again, as I've gone through verticals, one big difference is the influence of regulations, right? So for example, financial institutions, which are heavily regulated, to put a model into production requires a lot of vetting. It's very regulated, right? So that's one big difference. In e-commerce, like eBay, it doesn't come under that regulatory burden. So we can deploy. My team deploys models in 3-4 months, even quicker, because we don't have to prove anything to anybody that as long as the models are accurate and the investigators are happy with the leads that we are sending, it's stopping fraud. You can measure it very easily, right? So that's all that matters. So I have a lot of people in my team who come from banking experience, and they tell me that it's I haven't directly worked in a bank, but I can see even Visa. I have somebody in my team from Visa. It takes model into production, right? So that's one big difference. There are a lot of other differences, like explainability, right? Some verticals it's not as needed. Some verticals it's very much needed, right? So when you're stopping a customer transaction, the customers want to know why, right? So that's not needed in some domains, right? If you're kind of blocking it, you block, right? There's no burden. So those are some of the big differences. Then obviously the other one is how real time when the information doesn't change much, you can have a daily batch, right? So some domains require you to be real time, right? Use the latest information, right? So those are some of the big differences I've seen across verticals.
Excellent. Thank you. Mousumi, what are your thoughts?
Comment on other verticals just because I have served financial industry for the past 12+ years, but I would definitely agree with Satheesh that there is much more regulatory pressure in our industry, so there is definitely a more need for interpretability and explainability. So there is fear and mistrust when we talk about deep neural network or any advanced sophisticated machine learning model, while people will prefer a simple decision tree based or regression based model just because it's much easier to explain. So the black box thing is something really scares the regulators and the financial service leaders here. So there are some vendors like DataRobot. They're coming up with, I'm sure you guys already know about it, that they're explainable deep neural network models. So there's much more explainability in the entire workflow. So there are vendors that they're working on it, Cloud, Auto AML, DataRobot, SaaS Enterprise Miner, to name a few. So those will be my comments. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good thought. And also you're right, the tools also rise to the occasion, right? If there is a vacuum or there is a white space in some place and the tools look at it and say, yeah, we'll be able to do something about it, that kind of stuff. Mairtin, what are your thoughts about different verticals?
A few, but just to add to what Mousumi says, because it's really interesting, just to note that explicability is increasingly important, even in e-commerce. In non-regulated areas, explicability for clients is hyper important, especially when they move from systems that had explicability built in. So it's there's a lot of work being done in it, and it's absolutely fascinating. To talk about the different verticals, there's quite a few different verticals covered, within e-commerce. So, I mean, you've got different types of fraudsters, or you've got different types of products that would be of interest to fraudsters. But ultimately, I think the most fruitful way that we've thought about it is to try and think about it from the fraudster's perspective. And so I tried to think about, what do fraudsters want? We've probably got 3 or 4 categories of fraudsters across the whole gamut of e-commerce. You've got the selfish fraudster who wants free stuff for themselves and using somebody else's money. We've got the reseller who is interested in fraud as a business. You've got a type of reluctant fraudster who uses fraud just as a means to mask his identity because they're in the commission of another crime. A very interesting case in Canada where fraudsters were using a taxi app, committing fraud on the taxi app, not because they wanted the free rides, but because they wanted to ferry drugs around and police wouldn't stop taxis. So, it's the kind of way to think about it is slightly different. And then you've got other types of money laundering, small scale money laundering, when people get into, use marketplaces to basically rinse the system and get money out if they have access to cards. So I find it quite a fruitful way to think about this, the different verticals, is to categorize the fraudsters and then think about the industry that you're in, the vertical that you're in, and your competitors in that vertical, and say, which fraudster does this vertical serve? Which of these categories? And it may be more than one. There's resellers all over the place. Resellers can sell intangible goods. So I think it's, while there are big differences in the kind of things that people might be interested in terms of the selfish fraudster, the first category, not everyone is going to be interested in certain types of esoteric goods, but definitely they will be interested in, something. So it's a useful way for us to think about it.
Yeah, no, good. What do fraudsters want? That's a very good moniker, and interesting that looking from your background, you're able to categorize because the motivation behind the fraudsters is very important, right? That gives you a view of what is happening on this end and the ability to counteract.
Absolutely, and the most interesting thing about that is then you start to use that narrative to build features.
You use that narrative to well said. But I need to write that down. I will listen to it again and then write it.
That would be my guess.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Good. I think these are very good, interesting things. After 2 questions, I'm also keeping an eye on the question and answer panel. I think you can ask questions. If any of the attendees you want to ask questions, just ask questions. I will keep an eye on the question panel, and then I will ask the questions to our panelists. With that positive note, let us go to the 3rd question. This is more interesting. What are the interesting and effective opportunities of AI in your space, right? The things that you have worked on, what are the interesting things? Mousumi, I think I'll go first to you.
So a couple of things I can think of on top of my head. First is the implementation of more RPA-based solutions for automation, robotic process automation. We are doing it a lot at our current bank. Second is building advanced machine learning-based models rather than rule-based models, as Satheesh already mentioned, because it definitely has a lot of limitations. If you want to incorporate thousands of scenarios and unstructured data and all that, image and everything, so therefore that you definitely need an advanced ML-based model. Third is a lot of advanced NLP techniques are being used. So for example, we are using currently at our company Ngram technique, along with bag of words, and IDF techniques. So a lot of NLP-based advanced techniques are being used. More ensemble-based models and like neural networks or random forests are being used. And surely a lot of third-party ML platforms like DataRobot, Cloud Auto ML, or SAS Enterprise Miner is being, especially DataRobot is being used heavily at Wells Fargo currently. So those are the main 5 areas that I can definitely think of interesting and effective opportunities that is in our space, especially at banks.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. Satheesh, what are your thoughts? Interesting.
Yeah. So, it's fast changing. One of the most interesting opportunity that at least I see in the ML space is multimodal features, essentially. So what used to be structured is now, I call it, there are 5 types of features if you broadly classify it. Obviously you have structured, but graph-based features, right? Graph embeddings, is critical because there's fraudsters usually don't operate in one. It could be a ring, or so graph is pretty important. Graph-based embeddings, then NLP, obviously, because what people are talking in the reviews, or what the buyer and the seller are communicating. Even when you're talking about claims, what's the exchanges. So NLP-based features. So you have graph, you have NLP, and really one of the obviously is sequential features. Sequential features like we have seen an explosion in sequential data mining, mainly because of LSTMs in the last maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. But that has been mainly for language, right? So, but LSTM obviously, can capture sequences. It could be sequences of what kind of patterns your selling patterns are across categories, or all kinds of sequential features. So anything that's got sequence, you can embed that, right? And then finally is image, right? So you could when he's selling something, is he using a stock image versus something that he really has in his inventory, right? So it's the combination of those 5 category of features, right, which is really broad, because they span across algorithms. They like things like BERT to see if a sequence is anomalous, right? Yeah. Now, combining all these into one feature vector, because finally all these features have to become the independent variable space, right? So, and doing that in a way that's explainable, I don't think has been conquered yet, right? Because, because even though we have things like SHAP or Eli5, they can do feature reduction, but what does those interpretable AI mean in terms of an embedding of NLP and embedding, right? When you reduce language to a 700-dimensional vector, which what does each vector mean, and how does that combine with the other structured vectors, right?
Yep.
So that part is, I don't think is one of the biggest challenges. Then if I have time, I might just quickly cover 1 or 2 things. The other thing is, fraud is so fast changing that how models, require a little time, so how do you keep these models updated to capture, so that's the other big thing. And then, across verticals I've seen, I think Mairtin did mention this, is the bias in data, right? We learn only from what we go after, essentially, right? So in all the, even in claims processing, the auditors are biased by what they want to audit. They go and audit some things, and based on that, we decide the good and the bad, right? So by nature, models are built on operational systems, right? Operational data, right? And operational data is biased by the fact that, by what you decide to act on. So handling bias and capturing informative labels, you always got to the explore versus exploit paradigm, right? You can only exploit past knowledge data, right? But you got to explore too, right? So those are some of the big blocks in the future, I think.
Yeah, excellent. 2 points. At the same time, last week we had we moderated an explainability panel. So there might be some interesting, if you're able to watch it, there are some interesting notes on that one. And the second is, like you said, the unknown unknowns, right? The unknown unknowns are you can't capture in the models, so it becomes harder. Going back to you, Mairtin, what are the interesting opportunities and challenges that you see using AI in your space?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be really boring and say something that both Mousumi and Satheesh have already said. NLP and graphs. Graphs is the thing I'm most...
I was about to ask graph to you and say, hey, does this add like a fifth dimension to your motivation to do crime? Anyway, good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in fact, yeah, the motivation we use graphs. We've used them from the beginning, and it stemmed from the fact that we used much more simplistic graphs to kind of map, money laundering, telephone exchanges, things like that in Scotland Yard. It's a standard practice for intelligence analysis. I'm really excited by the applications of graphs in AI, graph features used in live modeling. It adds significant performance. You can use for some applications, you can use graph features on their own. And that's really the biggest opportunity for existing fraud systems. I think if they don't have graph features, it's something to really explore. And it's very exciting. They can also help you in not just in the probabilistic sense, but in graphing high cardinality nodes together. They really help you again with narrative, and it's very easy to see things like families, fraud rings. I mean, good and bad. A network in itself doesn't necessarily denote fraud, but it can, in large data terms, with enough data and enough labels, you can get a really great picture of what's good and what's bad, and it really helps you form a narrative. And I think that's great for explicability.
Excellent. Thank you. Good thoughts. Good comments. My next question might be slightly redundant. What we are looking at is what does the feature look like, right? We did talk about transformers in fraud, new algorithms, new platforms. Mousumi, I will give the question first to you. What do you see in the future? You can think of in the next couple of years, or you can look at it and say, oh yeah, in the future, these are some of the things that you see from a larger perspective.
So the longer perspective, definitely new platforms I can see that is being increasingly used. Data robots, SAS Enterprise Miner, Google Cloud, AutoML, I already mentioned. Definitely new algorithms. I mentioned a couple of those like Ngrams, TF-IDF, bag of words in LLC space. Surely I can see also blockchain being used in EDD space, enhanced due diligence and customer due diligence process. So those are some of the things I can surely see that, more and more being used, uses of unstructured data, uses of images, definitely cloud data being in the cloud is definitely is going to happen in very near future. And the opportunity of the people with lesser machine learning skills will also enhance in terms of data robot giving the opportunity, or cloud auto ML, just doing drag and drop. We can train a model, we can deploy a model, we can do champion challenger testing and so on. The entire end-to-end data cycle process, from data ingestion to data wrangling to feature engineering to model building, deployment, and the model governance. Everything is sort of streamlined in Data Robot. So those are some of the things that I can think of being more and more being used in a machine learning and AI space, especially at banks.
Good. The cloud is interesting because the elasticity, the computing power of the elastic computing power is interesting, and also the platforms. Good. Satheesh, what are your thoughts on the future?
I don't think the future is as much in the algorithms as much as it's in the data and the features. We are not going to find a better. The future doesn't lie in coming up with a better classifier, for example, right? Because it's that feature engineering and data is what it is, and fraud is a little different than what all the the major players are playing with. It's not training a cat versus a dog, where you can, for example, you can even generate samples like the GANs and all those things. Fraud is very hard to kind of, you can change the cat blur it up a little and get a point, right? In fraud, that's not possible. So, the answer, as I told you, lies in feature engineering, in answering the data challenges, which is feature engineering, combining the 5 modes of data I talked about in graphs, NLP, image, text, all those things, and doing it in an explainable way. That also is where the future is, right? Handling bias in data is important. So that's where the future lies, I think. To solve those kind of problems.
Good point. I also, that's what I was talking about, weak signals, right? Extracting interesting information out of weak signals, either by themselves or combining multiple weak signals together. Thank you. Good thought. Thank you. This is a good line of thought. Mairtin, future.
I think the biggest impact in the future for fraud detection in the e-commerce world, I think, is actually going to be legislative. I think there's going to be a lot of changes. The regulators in Europe are turning their BDI and being to the industry, and they're being increasingly prescriptive about how fraud needs to be tackled. So I think that's probably going to be, before we kind of get to talk about, advancements in the algorithmic side or in the feature engineering, we're going to have to make allowances for what the regulators are demanding that we do in fraud detection. And that will, part of that is about having probabilistic systems, of course, but they've already started to be quite prescriptive in the things that they're asking for. And that means things like explicit authentication. And that's going to have a big impact on fraud, because now the regulators in Europe mandate fraud must be kept at a certain percentage. So this is going to have a big, in PSD2. So when other regulators around the world, in Australia, even in California, regulatory change coming into other areas and being explicit about what's needed. I think that's probably going to be. They're unhappy with fraud and they want to do something about it.
No, that's interesting. So when you say the regulators come up with the fraud limits, they are saying that you can't have fraud more than a particular percentage of things or something.
It's similar to that. They're saying that if you want to do payments without authentication, you need to keep, so that's the first step, isn't it? If you want to do payments without authentication which causes dropout and causes customer dissatisfaction, you will need to have fraud under control and under, a very small number of basis points, Good. That's the future.
That's interesting. Most probably we have only 1 more minute left. So with one more minute left, I think I will look at the Q&A. There is nothing else in there. So I'll just go to Mairtin back again, just to say, if you have any final words for the attendees, any thoughts, any comments?
No, thank you very much for having me. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed hearing Mousumi and Satheesh and yourself, Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating.
Mousumi, any thoughts from you?
thank you very much for having me. And, I really enjoyed listening to all of you. So thank you so much for including me in the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's mutual. It's mutual. I think we all engaged. Satheesh, any thoughts from you?
It's fascinating when you especially combine. I think we all can learn from each other. Different verticals, I think, can inform one another. So I think this panel is, obviously, it kind of encourages that. So I think a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that the panel was a very short panel. That's the only thing that I can suggest. I do want to thank the panelists. Very interesting discussions. And also thanks to Katie and the gang at Rework who organized the panel and found the panelists.